And we do plan to provide the recording on our Ginnie Mae website, so you can look for the recording of this training later. Again, today you are with us for Ginnie Mae's Pool Transfer System, or PTS, Enhancements training. This is targeting our single-family issuers, but all are welcome to attend to learn about the enhancements that have been made to the system. And I am going to pass it off today to a very important person in our single family Office of Issuer and Portfolio Management, Bud Riley. Bud?
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you find this session helpful. The changes that were implemented recently to PTS were under development for quite a while. And really, they were driven by the fact that PTS was really inflexible. And to give an example of how inflexible it was prior to these changes, you could quite literally have a transfer of pools that was submitted, accepted by the buyer, and then upon second review, they look and realize there was one pool with one loan in a state where they're not licensed, right? And there was simply no course or way to remove that pool other than to cancel the entire deal and then resubmit it, less that one pool. So one of the things that we've added with these enhancements is the ability to add and remove pools from the transfer population. Now, as you can imagine, a system that's totally inflexible like that, you would think that we would wait to collect the transfer fee until everything was, finalized, T's crossed, I's dotted. But prior to the changes, the transfer fees were collected shortly after the submission was made. And that was problematic because oftentimes, folks realized there was a pool that had to come out and, the fee had been collected, then the transfer was canceled, and that subsequently led to a lot of refunds. So that was another problem. And there also, prior to the change, there wasn't the ability to move the effective reporting date, which you encounter if, you might expect that pools are going to be final certified by a certain date. It didn't happen. It would be helpful to have the means to move the effective reporting date back further out in the calendar. So that's another thing that was added with the enhancements. And certainly from a program management standpoint, it's hard to imagine the old system didn't do this, but it didn't prevent anybody from transferring a pool that lacked the required certification. So one of the things that the enhancements are going to do is that they will prevent the transfer of a pool that doesn't have the required certifications. And it's also going to have, towards that end, it will send out emails to the parties to the transfer in the event you're getting close to the end of the transfer period and there are pools that lack that certifications. It'll send out system generated emails to let you know that you have to get the certifications completed. I think the actual rollout of the software was at the very end of last year. And there are folks on the call, I know I work with Lakeview. They've been using it frequently. And if you have any questions about how you might encounter changes or questions that might arise with issuers who are not familiar with the system, they can probably speak to any questions since they are fairly active in the space. So that's about it. That's an overview of the changes. So with that, I'll pass the mic over. I guess, Jeff, you're up next.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Bud. My name is Jeff Janofsky. I am with the Bank of New York Mellon and helped put in these enhancements to the PTS system. And I'll be going through a couple of the items that Bud had spoken about. If you do have any questions, I ask that you please wait until the end of the session so that we can go over all of the questions at once. You also do have the ability to enter them into the chat. I have Wade Gale here assisting me, as well as Margaret Williamson, who is the SME for PTS. So should you have any questions that can't wait, feel free to type them in the chat and they can be addressed there. Continuing on, we'll take a look at the agenda, which once again, Bud did a very thorough job of going through. So we start out with our introduction for what the PTS enhancements were, talk about the updated pool processing timeline and show a diagram. And then we will actually have a discussion based on that diagram, providing more detail. We'll talk about changing the effective transfer date for a transfer, talk about adding and removing pools, new email notifications and the timeline of those notifications, very brief demo video to present the couple of the changes, and then we'll break out into it, or not break out, but then we'll have a Q&A session for any outstanding questions that may have. With that being said, we will get right into this. Today's introduction to the enhancements for PTS. So the enhancements for PTS provide the ability to change single family pool transfer details after they have been submitted. This is a very important one. All of the changes were related to single family and did not impact multifamily at all. The changes are limited to adding pools, removing pools, changing the effective reporting date to a future date. That is another key there. And updating payment, aka ACH information. Also, as part of these enhancements, PTS will automatically remove pools that lack certification from transfer requests during the final approval step. So here we have on our screen a diagram of the updated pool processing timeline. So where we're starting is in the top left-hand corner with the 90-day notice. And the selling issuer is going to create the transfer in the PTS application. Once they have created the transfer, they will submit to the buyer. The buyer AE is notified at this point in time. The buyer has the option to either accept, reject, or return to seller. So based on that decision, we'll start out with a happy path, and we will go with the buyer accepting the transfer, and it goes over to the buyer AE for their acceptance as well. Buyer AE is notified throughout all these processes so that they are always kept informed. And then we have the non-happy paths. So if the buyer chooses to reject the deal, this is where the deal ends. This is what the system would currently do. If a deal would need to be redone, typically they would have to go back and recreate the transfer, submit it again, and get all the approvals. However, with the introduction here, we have the ability to return to seller. So choosing the yellow path, we return it to the seller for the seller to make any changes. So this can be from a date perspective. This can be from a pool, either add or remove pools. And then once that seller recreate or updates the transfer, they have the ability again to submit to the buyer, and the process starts all over again. This simplifies things so that you don't have to cancel a transfer and recreate it from scratch. And the notes that we have down here, I will discuss a little bit later on, so I will continue on for this. So the updated timeline, the order of approvals is important. So the seller would submit a transfer request, the buyer would approve, and then the AE would approve as well. Now we have the seller submits a transfer request, the buyer rejects, the seller would have to recreate the transfer and submit a new pool transfer request. However, the changes as just noted, the seller is able to submit the transfer request. If the buyer rejects it, the seller has the ability to update that existing transfer and submit to the buyer, where the buyer then would approve, as well as the AE would approve as well. So one thing that Bud had mentioned is that pools that are lacking certification and other non-conforming characteristics of those transfers. So what he had touched upon is the fact that pools that have not been certified prior to the transfer period, which the transfer period in this case is the 25th of the month prior to the effective reporting date, will automatically be removed from the transfer by the system. And we'll touch upon the notifications that are associated with this in a short while. And so that's one of the characteristics. So that's lacking certification. And then the other non-conforming characteristics would be if the pools had been previously transferred within the past 180 days. So these are just examples of things that would have those pools removed automatically. Continuing on, we're talking about the changing of the effective reporting date. So the number of changes that are allowed to the effective reporting date is essentially unlimited, with a couple of caveats to updates that get made for the first 2 times. So upon changing the effective reporting date the first 2 times, the seller lockdown date, the buyer lockdown date, and the RESPA date will be updated. After those 2 times, you do have the ability to change the effective reporting date. However, those extra dates, the seller lockdown date, buyer lockdown date, and RESPA date will not be updated according to the effective reporting date. Also important to note here is that whenever you change the effective reporting date, you can push the reporting date out, but you cannot pull it back. So if you currently have a transfer, the effective reporting date would be July, you could push it out to August. However, you could not pull it back and do anything sooner than that. And the final note under the number of changes allowed is that whenever the effective reporting date is changed, just to make sure that all parties that are in agreement, this requires that the buying issuer reapproves the transfer request. So nothing can be updated without the buyer's being notified of it. When can the effective reporting date be modified? A selling issuer can modify the effective reporting date for a transfer up until the seller lockdown date. And we have defined here the seller lockdown date is the 26th calendar day of the month prior to the RESPA date. And the RESPA date is considered the 15th of the month prior to the buyer starting the servicing of that particular of those pools. Other notes here, if you're not familiar with the buyer lockdown date, that's an important one as well, which we will touch upon here on the next slide. Okay, so the adding and removing of pools and the number of changes allowed. This is what's considered a material change, so it's a major change to a transfer. So there are a maximum of 2 material changes allowed by the selling issuer. So if the buying issuer rejects or submits it back to the selling issuer once, and then they submit it back or reject it back to the selling issuer twice, the selling issuer has the ability to update those 2 times, but beyond that, they will not be able to make changes. You would have to cancel out the transaction and recreate everything. Okay. And the second note here, bullet point, is that a material change is any change other than a modification to the effective reporting date. And once again, adding or removing pools or making a material change requires the buying issuer to reapprove the transfer. Last section here is when can the pools be added or removed? So a selling issuer can add or remove pools for transfer up until the seller lockdown date, which is listed as the 26th calendar day of the month prior to the RESPA date. There are several new notifications that get sent out based on the action performed within the system. So with that being said, just a few of those to cover. For the notifications that are sent to the seller, whenever a fee is due based on the current pool population, notification is sent. Whenever Ginnie Mae approves the transfer, If the transfer request is declined from either the AE or the buying issuer, the seller is notified of the impending seller lockdown date, notifying them that they can make updates until that date. And finally here, sent to the seller is the buying issuer. If the buying issuer has not approved the transfer by the buyer lockdown date. And notifications sent to the buyer, similar to those sent to seller, if a new transfer request is received. Whenever Ginnie Mae provides approval for the transfer, if the transfer is declined from the AE, and finally, if the transfer is pending approval, once again, pending approval prior to the buyer lockdown date. It's important that they perform an action in the system prior to that buyer lockdown date. After that buyer lockdown date, the user will not be able to make changes to what is in there, especially for approvals. So the next item on the board is to go through a very short demo that we have, but I want to open this up to Bud real quick. Just want to make sure that I covered everything, make sure I'm not missing anything. Any additional points that you would like to provide to the issuers?
No, I think you covered it all. You know, the changes that we made, I would add, is that none of the changes have any impact on program requirements. The program requirements per the MBS guide remain in effect as they always have. The system changes were really designed to make this a more user-friendly platform.
Correct. And going along with that, Bud had mentioned it previously, but one of the changes to this was when the fee is actually collected. So there shouldn't be as many refunds, or if any refunds are required at all. So that was one of the strong points for making these enhancements in the system. Okay, with that being said, I will bring up a very short little demonstration here. This is only going to show a couple of the items in the system. Please note that this was done in a training environment. So if you see some data that may not represent actual production data, please be aware that that may be altered a little bit, just as a forewarning there. So I will go ahead and play this and I'll speak to it as it's going. So here we have our PTS application, and I will go ahead and play this. So what I'm doing is I am searching for a specific pool number that I had just to bring up an example. So we'll go ahead and search, and we'll click on the record that is found. So opening up that record, we can take a look, and here we can see that we have our payment details. We have the ability to edit the ACH, which we will go ahead and do. So this opens the fields up for modification, once again, allowing you to change these. So say I typed in the wrong account number, I can go ahead and switch the account number, click save, and the system will provide notification that those changes were saved successfully. At the same time, if I want to edit the reporting month and year, I have the ability to do so. I will click on the effective reporting month, select the updated date. You can notice that there are no previous dates, only future dates in that dropdown. And once again, we will click Save Reporting Month/Year. We can see that the updated date has been saved in the system. Okay, so those are changes to the ACH information and changes to the effective reporting date. The next two items that are going to be shown relate to some of the messages that are shown in the system, just so that you're not caught off guard if you do see these in the application. So here we can see that a pool transfer was created on or after the seller lockdown date, notifying them that pools cannot be added or removed. So there are situations in the application now where pools cannot be added or removed because those transfer requests were submitted later than what the system would allow, but we still allow those transfers to occur. And the second item here that we display from a notification standpoint. Taking a look, we can see that once again, this is a similar notification, but due to the shortened time frame, pools cannot be added or removed. This is what you would see as soon as you create the pool and submit it submitted to the submission center. You would be able to see that due to the shortened timeline, once again, you cannot add or remove pools. So these are some of the notifications that you're going to see in the system, and that's your ability to quickly and easily update the effective reporting date and the ACH information in the pool. Okay. With that, let's take a look. I believe we have Q&A session up next. So at this point in time, I believe everyone on the call is muted. If anybody would like to open up the line or unmute themselves and ask a question, please feel free to do so.
Hey, Jeff, this is Jonathan.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Jeff. Thanks for going through this demonstration. One of the things that I want you to bring to our issuers' attention is when they will get notifications of the documents associated with the transaction, such as the assignment agreement. Did you?
I don't know if Jeff heard that, but yeah, I can speak to that. So in the past, we used to have the assignment agreement go out. I think it was pretty much after the transfer was approved, and under the enhancements here, that documentation goes out following, well, it's really the buyer lockdown date, which is the 8th business day of the month. That's when the assignment agreement emails are generated and go out. So that is another change that was in there, and we have gotten some questions around that. That's a good point, Jonathan. Jeffrey, are you still on? You able to hear us? Okay?
Sorry, yeah, I'm not quite sure what was going on. I heard Bud's response, but I didn't hear anything else. Apologies.
No problem. All right, should we take the next question?
Just to let folks know that if you do have a question, you're welcome to participate in a couple of ways. You can unmute your line and ask it live, and we're happy to answer it that way. Or if you're more comfortable, you can type it into the chat, and we'll read it out loud and address your question there. So any questions from anyone in the audience today?
This is Brian Weiler. I have a question. Will this PowerPoint presentation be available?
So there's not a lot of girth, if you will, to the PowerPoint presentation. Most of it is in those screenshots that we were sharing. So what we plan to do is provide you the recording for today. As you can see, we were able to wrap things up in, under 30 minutes. So should be a pretty easy and accessible recording for you to view, but we will be providing that for you on our website.
That works. Thank you.
Yep, perfect. So we do have a question for you today, trying to get a sense of, if we can expect any increased traffic through PTS. So can I find out what folks were hoping to get out of today's session, and if you plan to do activity through our pool transfer system in the future? And you know me, I will call on people.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can. Who's talking?
I am Cindy Ernest with USAA.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi, we have never performed, well, I'll say since I've been with USAA, we've never processed a transfer. So we're looking at potentially doing that in the future. And so I was trying to gather information on aspects of what needed to be done. I just have one general question, because what I'm hearing from our other department is that Ginnie Mae allows like concurrent date sales. Is that a true statement? And are all transfers handled this way?
So I'll take that question. This is Jonathan Hughes. So the concurrent sale of servicing is in PIT, and that's through Ginnie Net. That is not through the PTS system. So to your point, there are two types of transfers. There's what we call the bulk transfer,
Mm-hmm.
are pools that have already been established and then are transferred to the buying issuer. Then there's the PIT process where your capital markets or your area will go in and create a pool and then select in that transaction a transfer to the to a servicer. That's in our PIT program. So there are two separate structures. One is an immediate transfer. One is a delayed transfer.
Okay. And this is the bulk process here. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. I am just going to read them out. How is the buyer lockdown date determined? That Cynthia's asking that one. How is the buyer lockdown date determined? Who can answer that one?
I'll take that, Wade.
I can take that, Wade. So the buyer lockdown date was established around the fact that the first 5 business days of the month, PTS is blacked out, meaning that you can't get in there and do anything with it. So since the guide provides for 2 business days for the buyer to accept a transfer, we decided that you could have a scenario where the transfer was submitted at the very end of the month, and of course the following week the system's blacked out and the buyer can't accept it. They're not able to log in. So what we did is we gave them 2 days after that. So we took the 8th business day as the lockdown date for the buyer to accept the transfer.
Okay. I see another one from Ginnie. What would be the timeline once the pool is released to the servicer for transfer?
I'm not quite sure I understand what they mean by released. So once the transfer is done, the timeline is defined by the boarding date, which is when the buyer, when the consumer starts paying the buyer. So all of those of your customers who are paying their mortgages will now pay the buyer on a certain date. 30 days after that date will be the reporting date for the buyer to report on that activity of the previous month. So there's a boarding date that's 30 days before the effective reporting date. The reporting date is when the seller moves all of its data to the buyer, and the buyer will be receiving payments from borrowers. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, I have another one from Cynthia. Other than accepting/rejecting a transfer, can the buyer add or remove the pools, or only the seller?
Only the selling issuer has the ability to modify a transfer. So in this case, they would need to return the transfer back to the selling issuer with the changes that are requested. The selling issuer can make the updates and they can resubmit it to the buying issuer for approval.
Okay, and Cynthia's on a roll. On the slide discussing the approval process, there was a streamline or a non-streamline approval. What is the difference?
Sure, I can speak to that. So that reflects the processing rules that Ginnie Mae follows internally. And essentially, if a transfer represents less than 25% of either the seller or the buyer's portfolio, that enables the account executive to follow what we call streamlined processing, which essentially just means there's a minimal number of approvals required internally. When we encounter transfers that are 25% or more of either the seller or buyer portfolio, there is a potential for that to have meaningful impacts, for instance, on the DQ profile of either issuer, and it involves a little bit deeper analysis and some analytics on the part of the account executive. And it also requires additional approvals from management team members at Ginnie Mae. But that's really an internal differentiation. The only thing you would see externally is if you happen to be the seller on a non-streamlined transfer, Ginnie Mae does have a questionnaire. It's, I don't know, maybe 15 questions just to collect some additional background in terms of the motivation behind the transfer. But
Okay.
this is something that's
So Margaret
Wait,
had said,
just-
Bud, Margaret
sorry.
had said streamline is what is called a happy path, where there are no issues with the transfer going through, and a non-streamlined transfer with issues. Margaret had something to say. You can speak.
No, I was
You're
just
expert.
saying that I was responding to the questions on the chat. So,
Right. I saw that.
okay.
I see another one here. Which will uncertified pools that are less than a year from issue be approved for transfers? And that was from Lisa McCarthy.
This is Jonathan. I'll take that one. So there's a caveat on that. Yes, if they're less than 12 months from the date of issuance, generally speaking, they will be approved to go through. However, if those pools are transferred in less than 180 days, the transaction will not be approved.
Lisa, I hope that answers your question. Because Jonathan was very adamant in his answer, so I hope it answered your question.
So just to be clear on the 180 days, that means that it was transferred once and transferred a second time within 180 days. That's that rule. That transfer probably would not get transferred.
Super. Lisa is good with your answer, Jonathan. She said, yes, thank you. So she's happy with your answer.
Great, thank you.
And Cynthia, again, is the 180 days from the effective reporting date? That's her question. Is the 180 days from the effective reporting date?
It's the 180 days since the previous transfer date.
Cynthia, you heard that? It's 180 days from the previous transfer date. So that's the answer to your question. I hope that is good enough. If it is a new pool, is it then from the issue date?
No, it's still tied to a transfer from one issuer to another, and that issuer back selling it sooner than the 180 days in another transfer. It doesn't have to do with when the pool was necessarily issued. It's within that 12-month period, and if it's less than 180 days since the last transfer.
Okay. Any more questions? Any more little tidbits from Jonathan and Bud? Anything you want to share? Just want to give anything else you want to share with the users?
The one thing I would say is if you have any questions, you can always reach out to your account executive. And if you have any suggestions about other changes or improvements that you think could be made, we're all ears. Let us know.
Sure, and I'll add also, Bud, just in case you're working in the system and you get in any hiccups, don't hesitate to reach out to our resident expert on PTS, Margaret Williamson, and I'm sure she'll be willing to walk you through the steps that you're having difficulties in.
And I'll also add to that, to Bud's point, we are looking forward to doing some additional enhancements on things that were part of the legacy PTS that still need to be addressed. But we are very, very happy that we could get this functionality out to you guys now, as we think it'll make the transactions a lot smoother with fewer disruptions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hey guys, it's Letitia back with you. So a couple things before we wrap up. We are going to send out to everyone who attended a few short questions, actually 3 questions. We're going to want to know from you if today's session was helpful. We're going to want to know from you if you'd like additional training on pool transfers. And we're also going to know if there's additional information that you would have liked to have received today. So please be on the lookout for that email. It'll be, like I said, 3 short questions, and we are really looking forward to hearing from you. But before we go, Cindy, where can you find more information on PIT, P-I-I-T? Jonathan, I believe we posted some things to the website. Is that correct?
Yes, there is. There's an application there, and there's also a discussion on it in our MBS guide of how it works. Yeah, so there's information out there on the Ginnie Mae website.
Okay.
I would just add that if you're interested in doing PIT transfers, like Jonathan mentioned, there is an application, so there's an approval process that you go through to become PIT approved, as well as an annual renewal.
Okay. All righty. I want to send a big thank you to the folks today who helped create and support today's training. So shout out to Jeff Janowski for leading us today through this training, for Wade Gale, Maribel Kanan, also Margaret Williamson at the Bank of New York, who helped answer your questions and actually develop today's content. Definitely want to send a big shout out to our Ginnie Mae representation on the line today. First and foremost to Bud Riley and Jonathan Hughes from our Office of Issuer and Portfolio Management, who were strong push behind these enhancements and getting you this information. LaWanda Dates, the #1 project manager at Ginnie Mae, in my humble opinion right now. So thank you, LaWanda, for all of your support and helping us develop the changes and enhancements to the system, as well putting together this training. And I cannot forget Tiana Darrington, who hosted today's session and made sure everyone was able to get in. Thank you so much to everyone involved. Appreciate your help so much. Thank you for attending. And as I mentioned, we will have a recording posted to the website in just a couple of days. Have a great day and be looking for those survey questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.